Today we're going to have a short introduction to Eastern Orthodoxy. There are many different kinds of Christians in the world, but almost all the Christians in the world can be put into four big traditions. Those four traditions are Catholicism. About half of all the Christians in the world are Catholic. About 10% are Orthodox. About 20% are Protestant. And about 20% are Pentecostal. So what we're talking about today is the 10% of the pie that represents Orthodox Christianity. If we want to be precise, Orthodox Christians actually make up about 11.5 to 12% of all the Christians in the world, but we've rounded around down to 10 just for simplicity's sake. This is where Orthodox Christians live in the world today. About 95% of all the Orthodox Christians in the world today live either in Eastern Europe and Russia or in the Middle East, and especially in Egypt, and then a little bit further south in Ethiopia. So many of you probably have met Orthodox Christians, but the majority of Orthodox Christians don't live in the United States. They live in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. There's going to be 5 quick parts to this talk. The first is Orthodox history. The second is Orthodox worship. The third is understanding Orthodox churches in the plural, because there are many Orthodox churches as opposed to, for example, only one Roman Catholic church. We'll talk very briefly about the Orthodox view of salvation, and finally we'll say something about icons, which are something that's unique, at least distinctive about Orthodoxy, if not absolutely unique. So a little bit about Orthodox history. Orthodox Christianity goes all the way back to the ancient Roman Empire. Orthodoxy comes out of the Christianity that quickly spread all around the Roman Empire. Christianity also spread to the east into Asia, but it spread more quickly into the Roman Empire because the Roman Empire had better means of transportation and better means of communication. Something about the Roman Empire, though. The Roman Empire was divided in two by language. Most of the people in the western part of the Roman Empire spoke Latin. Most of the people in the eastern part of the old Roman Empire spoke Greek. And Eastern Orthodoxy, or Orthodox Christianity, is going to come out of the Greek-speaking side of the old Roman Empire. That's why sometimes you hear Eastern Orthodoxy referred to simply as Greek Orthodoxy, because it comes out of this side of the old Roman Empire. The centrality of worship. For Orthodox Christianity, the most important thing that Orthodox Christians do is they worship God together in an Orthodox church. This is an Orthodox church. When you go into an Orthodox church, Orthodox Christians believe you are going in to join into the eternal worship of God that is always going on in heaven. And in participating in the church liturgy, you have a chance to participate in that eternal worship for just a short time. Orthodox churches, the buildings themselves, are really considered to be sacred space. And going into an Orthodox church is entering a different world. Orthodox churches specifically, they're designed to be like a throne room for meeting God. This is not just wandering into another meeting hall. This is a place where you stand in the presence of God. And as you can see by all the pictures around the walls, you don't stand alone. You are surrounded by pictures of the saints of all ages. So the idea of worship in Orthodoxy is that all the saints from all times and all places are worshiping God. Some are worshiping God in heaven all the time. We on earth have the opportunity to join in once in a while by going through the Orthodox liturgy. Orthodox worship on Sunday. Most Orthodox churches have a dome on top of them. Not all, but most. And if you go inside and you look up at the dome, you'll probably see a picture of Christ at the top, surrounded by angels and apostles. And the dome really is intended to be like a window into heaven. So again, if worship is joining with the eternal worship that's always going on in heaven, the building itself is designed to give you that feel that what you're doing on the ground, and you're standing in a traditional Orthodox service, you stand, you do not sit. You stand in the presence of God just like you would stand in the presence of the President of the United States. You stand, and the dome, it's called an oculus, is like a window into heaven where you can see Christ looking down and all the saints worshiping together. They're sacred places. When people come in, they're quiet, they're reverent, they light candles. It's a place for reverence, for prayer, for meditation. The Orthodox Church. Orthodox Christians see the Orthodox Church itself as the body of Christ. The institution is the church. Okay? Let me give you a brief comparison, because most of you are Protestants. For Protestants, there's a difference between the church, which most Protestants think of as an invisible spiritual community of all people who put their faith in God. And then there are many visible churches that we organize ourselves into. So there's a difference between the visible church and the invisible. Orthodox Christians don't see things like that at all. For Orthodox Christians, there is only one church. It is visible. It is both institutional and spiritual. And it is also the Orthodox Church. So many Orthodox Christians would think of the kinds of churches that Protestants go to as not really churches at all. They're a little bit more like Christian clubs, where you get together for activities, but the church is the church, the Orthodox Church, which joins in the worship of God that's going on eternally in heaven every week, following the ancient practices of worship that go back to the early centuries of the church. Orthodox Christianity has no pope. There's no one single leader of Orthodox Christianity. Instead, what you have is one Orthodox tradition that's represented in a variety of different independent churches. Independent but interconnected. Orthodoxy really exists as a network of churches that stay in communication with each other, well, by talking to each other. This should be relatively easy for you all to understand, because when I was growing up, what was important was what organizations are you a member of? But for most of you, being a member of something isn't that important. It's who are you networked with as your friends or online or whatever. Orthodoxy is the same way. It's a network of sort of churches that are friends with each other, that keep on following the same way of faith, but they do so by staying in communication with each other, not by having one person in charge of the whole ball of wax. This goes back all the way to the Roman Empire. In the ancient Roman Empire, there were 5 cities that were the major centers of Christianity. Rome, Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. And the heads of these 5 churches together were known as the Christian pentarchy. Pent means 5, archy means rule. Ruled by these 5 leaders of these 5 churches. Those leaders are called patriarchs. But what happened in the ancient Roman Empire is in the 400s, the eastern half of the Roman Empire was invaded by barbarians, and the Roman Empire shrank to just this eastern side of the Roman Empire. The Christians in this part of the world continued to exist as a network of 4 churches, and this becomes the Orthodox Christian world, while Rome, left by itself out here with the barbarians, eventually becomes the single center of Latin-speaking Christianity in Western Europe. The division between Orthodox Christianity and Catholic Christianity, for 1,000 years their histories are intertwined. They're slowly beginning to diverge from each other, but 1054 is usually given as the date of the Great Schism, the date when Orthodox Christianity and Catholic Christianity went their own ways and became 2 separate and distinct traditions. Again, they'd been drifting apart before that, but 1054 is the date. The structure of an Orthodox church. What does an Orthodox church look like? There are many different Orthodox churches, like the Greek Orthodox Church or the Russian Orthodox Church or the Romanian Orthodox Church. They're all put together pretty much the same way. At the top is a person called a patriarch. The patriarch is the head of an Orthodox church. So the Patriarch of Moscow would be the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. Underneath the patriarch, there are a number of bishops that would serve in different major cities and regions. They would be called dioceses that bishops oversee. Underneath bishops, there are lots of priests. But one of the things that's different about priests in the Orthodox tradition than, for example, the Catholic tradition, is that most priests in the Orthodox churches are married and have families. And it's assumed that you really can't be a good pastor to families in your church unless you yourself understand what families are like. So most Orthodox priests, not all of them, but most of them are married. And then there's all the people that are part of the Orthodox Church. But that's not the end either. Alongside, in the Orthodox tradition, there are monks. Again, there are monks in Catholicism too, but monks in Orthodoxy are a little different. Monks, on the one hand, serve as spiritual advisors for ordinary people in the church. If you want spiritual advice, you're trying to make a decision, you're trying to examine your own life to see where you need to work on holiness and where you need to work against sin in your life, you talk to a monk often. But the second role that monks have is that monks are the people who eventually become bishops because bishops are not married. So the typical route to becoming a bishop or a patriarch is to have been a monk first and then to move into the bishopric and then become a patriarch. This is different than in the Catholic tradition where it's priests who become bishops and then have the possibility of becoming selected as pope. Orthodox view of salvation. Different churches have slightly different views of salvation. It's all related to Jesus Christ. It's all related to his life and his death and his resurrection, but different churches see these things differently. For Orthodox Christians, salvation is a process. It is a lifelong journey toward God. There's no one single event when you can say, before that event I was unsaved, and after that event I was saved. Salvation is a long process that is not done until you die or after you die. It's a long process of being made holy. Orthodox believe that everyone is born bearing the image of God. Every child that's born bears the image of God. In the Western Christian traditions, in Catholicism and Protestantism, it's taught that children are born with something called original sin that separates them from God, so that children are born separated from God. The Orthodox tradition rejects that notion. When children are born, they are not born separated from God. They are born bearing the image of God in their person. Now, that said, when people are born, they are born spiritually weak and even spiritually dying. But they are spiritually alive. So the process of salvation in the Orthodox tradition is kind of fanning that image of God, fanning that connection with God into a bigger and bigger sort of flame of holiness and love. It's a process. It's a long, slow process. It's not an event. Baptism and the Eucharist are means by which God feeds people's souls and helps them to grow toward him in holiness. In the Orthodox tradition, though, Christians are also expected to put effort into becoming more holy, put effort into following God, put effort into trying to be a better Christian. One of the ways they do that is through prayer, and the most famous prayer in the Orthodox tradition is called the Jesus Prayer. Many Orthodox Christians pray this prayer literally hundreds or thousands of times a day. And the prayer is simply, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Okay? Praying that prayer every day it helps to remind you of your position in relation to God as a child of God, but a sinner still, also your relation to other people. Don't get too uppity if you're reminding yourself every minute that you're a sinner. So it's one of the most famous prayers, widely used prayers in Orthodoxy. But it's not just the sacraments, it's not just your own efforts, it's not just prayer that help you to salvation. In the Orthodox tradition, it's assumed that everyone who's a Christian is in the business of helping everybody else move forward on that journey towards holiness, on that journey towards salvation. So if you talk to Orthodox Christians, they will tell you again and again that no one is saved alone. We are saved with all of the other children of God, all of the other people that are on the way to holiness, the pathway to holiness, the journey to holiness. We are saved together as a people, not simply as individuals. The goal of salvation in the Orthodox tradition is called deification, which is a word that strikes many people from Western Christianity, Catholic or Protestant, as really a little troubling, a little odd. But the image is, this is an image from an ancient Orthodox teacher called John of Damascus. He said, we have the image of God in us when we're born. The goal of the pathway towards salvation is to allow that image of God to become clearer and clearer in our lives so that when people look at us, they see the love of God and they don't really see us anymore. And the analogy is to a piece of steel that looks black and ordinary until it's heated in a fire and then begins to glow orange just like the fire itself. So in essence, the iron becomes fire, or it looks like fire. And that's the kind of thing that Orthodox mean to communicate with the word deification. It's the word that we in the Western tradition would much more likely use as being filled with the Spirit. But they use the term deification. The process of salvation in the Orthodox tradition happens something like this. It's supposed to be a slow growth of becoming more and more holy until we reach the point of deification, at which point in heaven we become enveloped into the eternal love of God that binds the three persons of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, eternally together. And the goal is ultimately in heaven to be bound up with our love for each other and a love for God in that eternal love that holds the Trinity itself together. That's the ultimate end point of salvation in the Orthodox tradition. Finally, last point, why are icons so important? We have some pictures in Protestant churches, there are some pictures in Catholic churches, some pictures in Pentecostal churches, but Orthodox Christians have icons. Why? First, what are icons? Icons are paintings of saints. They're paintings of Jesus. They're paintings of the Virgin Mary, who in the Orthodox tradition is known as Theotokos, a Greek word that means the mother of God, the one who bears God, who bore God. There's also pictures of biblical stories can become icons as well. Saints, Jesus, Theotokos, biblical stories, and of other saints that have come along. These pictures are deemed to be holy. Just like the Orthodox Church is a sacred space in some way, more sacred than just an ordinary classroom, these pictures are in some sense sacred. They are in some sense holy. In some sense, they possess the holiness to some degree of the person who's pictured on the icon. And therefore, when you see people come into an Orthodox church, people will often go up to the icons and kiss them. They'll bow before them. What they're doing is showing respect and love for the person who's represented, but the icon itself is understood to have a kind of holiness and a kind of spiritual power that's captures some of the holiness of the person himself. Within the Orthodox tradition, there was a huge argument. It lasted almost 200 years about whether it was right to have icons or not. There were a number of Orthodox Christians who said, I don't know, I see these people coming into church kissing these icons, it looks like idolatry to me. And other people said, no, this is an ancient practice. We've had these pictures forever. We've venerated these icons forever. We need to keep them. It went on for almost 200 years. It was finally settled in 842 at an event called the Triumph of Orthodoxy that followed a major council that was held in Constantinople. And even now, every year, Orthodox churches celebrate the triumph of Orthodoxy on the first Sunday of Lent each year. And ever since 842, icons have been a significant part of the Orthodox tradition. Why? Why? The reason is this. For Orthodox Christians, the fact that the wood and the paint of an icon can somehow take on holiness is the guarantee that our own human flesh and blood can also somehow take on God's holiness. Because we are material stuff, just like the wood and the paint. But if wood and paint can be holy, surely blood and flesh can become holy as well. In the same way that Jesus was fully human and fully divine, without mixing the humanity and the divinity, we as human beings can be filled with God's Spirit. And the icons are a way of saying, if it can happen for wood and paint, it can happen to us. So, icons are the proof and assurance of our own salvation, and that is why they're so important in the Orthodox tradition. And that is a very brief introduction to Orthodox Christianity.